The battlefield was a desolate expanse, nothing more than scorched earth and crumbling remnants of ships that had once been mighty war machines. Now they were nothing more than metal carcasses, scattered across the horizon like the skeletons of some long-forgotten beast. Lieutenant Jason Cray had seen countless horrors in his years of service, but this was something else entirely. His battalion had been obliterated in a matter of hours, and now he was alone, standing amidst the wreckage of a war he had no hope of winning. "Great," Jason muttered to himself, tapping the side of his helmet as if that might magically give him some answers. "Stuck in the middle of nowhere, no backup, and half the damn galaxy out to get me. If I survive this, I swear I'm taking a long vacation. Maybe on a beach, with no guns." A sudden crackling sound broke through his thoughts. Jason spun around, rifle raised, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. But all he saw was the wreckage and the eerie silence of the alien planet. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the noise stopped. "Well, that's normal," he said sarcastically, lowering his rifle. His humor, like his optimism, was quickly becoming a distant memory. But before he could take another step, a soft, almost imperceptible sound reached his ears. Something far too light to be another explosion, but unmistakably there. Jason tensed, instinct taking over. It was the kind of sound that no soldier ever liked. A living thing, something human or alien, just out of sight. He crouched low, moving carefully through the debris, his boots crunching over gravel and twisted metal. The source of the sound seemed to come from a narrow, ruined structure a few yards away. Jason's mind raced as he approached, his hand hovering over the grenade launcher strapped to his back. In these situations, trust was a luxury, and caution was a necessity. He rounded the corner of the structure, expecting to find a hostile force lying in wait. Instead, he found a woman. She was barely conscious, crumpled against the shattered remains of a vehicle. The woman's skin was a striking shade of blue, her features sharp and elegant, a look that was simultaneously alien and human. Her long ears flicked slightly, as if she could hear him, though she hadn't moved since his arrival. "Did I just find an alien princess, or is this some sort of weird dream?" Jason muttered under his breath, crouching next to her. He had seen aliens before. He'd fought them, shot at them, even negotiated with a few. But none of them looked like this. Her armor, gleaming despite the dirt and grime, was unlike anything he had seen on the battlefield. It looked ceremonial, almost regal, which only added to the mystery. "Hey," Jason said, his voice soft but firm, trying to make her aware of his presence. "You alive over there? Or am I wasting my time talking to an alien corpse?" The woman's eyelids fluttered, her breathing shallow. Jason's heart skipped a beat. He had seen death up close too many times, and yet something about this felt different. The thought of leaving her, of turning his back on a life in need, gnawed at him. The soldier in him screamed to keep moving, to focus on survival. But there was something about her that made him hesitate. "Come on, don't do this to me," Jason groaned, shaking her gently. "I didn't sign up for this level of weird today." Her eyes finally opened, revealing glowing silver irises that seemed to pierce through the gloom of the battlefield. She blinked a few times, as if adjusting to the reality around her. "You saved me?" she asked in a voice that was melodic, otherworldly, yet oddly familiar. Jason raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I did. Couldn't exactly leave you out here to rot, could I? Though I admit, I have no idea what the hell you're doing out here. This isn't exactly a tourist hotspot." The woman's lips twitched into what might have been the faintest smile, despite her obvious pain. I was on a diplomatic mission. Peace talks, if you can believe that. Not exactly how I imagined it going." "Well, nothing ever goes according to plan, does it?" Jason replied with a wry grin. "And here I thought I was just going to spend my day avoiding getting blown up. Now I'm playing nurse to an alien princess." She stared at him for a moment, then slowly, carefully, she sat up, wincing slightly. "Princess? Hardly. I'm Solara, daughter of Queen Arethia of the Etherian Empire. And I owe you my life." Jason's mind raced. A princess? No wonder she had the look of someone important. He had to admit, he hadn't expected this kind of rescue mission when he'd woken up this morning. He'd been expecting a war zone, not a chance encounter with an alien royalty in distress. Well, Solara, Jason said, dusting himself off and offering her a hand. You're welcome, I guess. But next time, maybe pick a less dangerous spot to take a nap, yeah? She took his hand with surprising strength and rose to her feet. I will remember that advice. As she stood, Jason noticed how her strange aura seemed to subtly shift the atmosphere around them. It wasn't something he could explain, but he could feel it, like a quiet hum in the air that made him uneasy. He couldn't quite place it, but there was something about her presence that made everything seem off. All right, let's get you out of here, Jason said, shaking off the feeling. He had a soldier's job to do, and he wasn't about to let anything, least of all an alien princess, distract him. But as he turned to lead the way, he couldn't help but wonder, what in the galaxy had he just gotten himself into? Jason and Solara moved through the wreckage of the battlefield like two ghosts. The chaos of the planet's surface seemed to have faded in the wake of their strange alliance. Every step they took, however, was a reminder that they were far from safe. The Etherian Empire, with its sprawling fleets and heavily armed forces, was hunting them both. Yet despite the danger, Jason couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm in Solara's presence. All right, so let me get this straight, Jason said, attempting to break the tense silence that had settled between them. You're the daughter of a queen, but here you are, stranded on a foreign planet, looking like you just got out of a fashion show for armored warriors. Solara let out a quiet laugh, though it was laced with weariness. It wasn't part of the plan. I was sent to negotiate peace with the Zorvac Syndicate. But things went wrong, very wrong. One moment I was discussing trade routes, the next, explosions, gunfire, betrayal. And then here I am, saved by a human soldier with a questionable taste in battle tactics. Jason shot her a grin. Hey, I'll have you know my questionable tactics have kept me alive longer than most. Not that I'm bragging or anything, but okay, I'm bragging. Solara gave him a dry look. I noticed. The banter helped ease the weight of their situation, but only slightly. The stakes were too high, the danger too immediate. They needed to find shelter and regroup, and fast. Fortunately, Jason's tactical training had honed a sharp instinct for survival, even on unfamiliar terrain. His mind quickly analyzed their surroundings. An old outpost about 5 clicks to the east, which had the look of an abandoned rebel hideout. It was their best shot at getting off the open ground and somewhere more defensible. Stay close, Jason said, as he motioned for her to follow. And for the love of whatever gods you believe in, don't attract any more attention than we already have. I'm not exactly equipped for a small army of angry Etherian soldiers on my tail. Solara raised an eyebrow. You really think I can't handle a few soldiers? Jason couldn't help but chuckle. I didn't say that, but, I'm more familiar with shooting at things that shoot back, not getting involved in royal family drama. She shot him a wry smile. Then perhaps you should know that royal family drama can be much more deadly than a squadron of soldiers with guns. Jason stopped, considering this. He dealt with dangerous people, but the idea of galactic politics seemed more complex than he was prepared for. Is that supposed to make me feel better? I thought it might, Solara said with a glint in her eye. I could be wrong. The journey to the rebel outpost was uneventful, but the silence between them was charged with unspoken questions. Jason couldn't help but be intrigued by the alien princess's composure. Despite the chaos surrounding her, she was not the panicked victim he'd expected. Instead, she seemed to glide through danger, her confidence steady and unwavering. Jason, on the other hand, had always been a soldier. He thrived in combat, not in diplomatic missions or negotiations. Okay, so let's say I'm on board with this whole peacekeeping thing, Jason began, trying to distract himself from the growing tension. What exactly are you trying to do? Lead a rebellion? Start a revolution? Solara sighed, her eyes narrowing slightly as she processed his words. I didn't want to start a revolution. I wanted peace. But the Zorvac Syndicate, the galaxy isn't interested in peace. It's interested in power, in control. My mother, she trailed off, a shadow passing over her features. She's not the tyrant you might think. But I fear that her quest for stability will lead to something far worse than war. Jason paused, a thought forming in his mind. So you're saying your mother might be the bad guy? Solara shook her head. Not exactly. She's simply caught between duty and fear. She believes the galaxy can only survive under a tight grip. But I'm not so sure. Well, that's a nice little family drama you've got going on there, Jason said, trying to lighten the mood. I'll be honest, I'm not a therapist, but I can offer some advice. Therapy for the galaxy. Don't let your mother blow everything up. She stared at him for a moment, then let out a soft laugh. I'll keep that in mind. They reached the rebel outpost just as the sun, if you could call it that, began to set. The planet's twin moons hovered in the sky, casting a pale light across the dilapidated structures. Jason signaled for Solara to keep quiet as they approached, his hand resting on the grip of his blaster. He knew better than to trust anyone completely, especially in enemy territory. The outpost was a shell of its former self, its walls cracked and its communication systems barely functional. Inside, a group of rebels sat around a table, their faces tense. They didn't look surprised to see Jason, but the sight of Solara seemed to shake them to their core. Thought you'd be dead by now, one of the rebels muttered, eyeing Jason with a mix of suspicion and disbelief. Not quite yet, Jason said, giving them a cocky grin. And I'm sure you're thrilled to know we've got an alien princess with us. There was a moment of stunned silence before another rebel spoke up. You're... really? Solara stepped forward, her presence commanding despite the weary look in her eyes. Yes, I am Solara, daughter of Queen Arethia, and I need your help. The rebels exchanged glances, uncertainty filling the room. Jason could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the tension rising once more. But in that moment, it didn't matter. They had survived the first obstacle. Now the real fight was just beginning. Jason leaned against the crumbling wall of the rebel outpost, his arms crossed and eyes scanning the room. The rebels were nervous, but that wasn't surprising. Solara, daughter of the queen, had just walked in, and they were probably calculating whether helping her would result in immediate death or the slow, agonizing kind. Jason had seen that kind of hesitation before. People didn't trust royalty, not when they were on the run at least, but the rebellion wasn't exactly in a position to turn away allies either. They were as desperate as he was. I'm sure we can all agree that we're not exactly the top of the food chain around here, Jason said, breaking the silence with his usual dry tone. So if you're going to stare at the princess like she's a walking target, maybe you could at least offer her a drink? You know, show some hospitality. One of the rebels, a wiry man with a chipped jaw and a half-scratched face, shot him a look. You really think we have drinks in here? We barely have enough rations to last another day. Well, that's unfortunate, Jason said, unfazed. Guess I'll just have to make do with sarcasm for now. Works every time. Solara, standing at the center of the room, cast a glance at Jason, then at the rebels. Her posture was regal despite the situation, as if she were used to being in control. I understand your reluctance, she said, her voice calm but firm, but I'm not here to lead your rebellion. I'm here to prevent something far worse. Jason raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Care to elaborate? You're going to have to work a little harder than that if you want me to believe the destiny of the galaxy speech. Solara's gaze flicked to the others in the room. The rebels were waiting for her to speak, and Jason noticed that some were starting to relax, maybe even see the value in her presence. She wasn't just some royal figurehead. She had a mission, and somehow that mission involved him. The thought made Jason uneasy, but he pushed it aside. This wasn't the time for second-guessing. My mother believes in order through power, Solara continued, her tone steady. She would rather see the galaxy under a single iron fist than let the various factions coexist. I can't let her do that. Not when it will destroy everything in its path. Jason nodded slowly, taking in the weight of her words. So, your mom wants to blow things up in the name of peace. That's a new twist. Something like that, Solara said, her lips twitching as if she were trying to find humor in the dark situation. It's not about destruction, it's about control. She believes if the galaxy is unified under a single rule, we can prevent the chaos that always follows war. But she's wrong. Jason couldn't help but snort. Wow, she sounds like a real peach. He glanced at the rebels. And I'm guessing you folks think her approach is, a little extreme? The rebel leader, a woman with short silver hair and a scar over one eye, stood up, her arms crossed. Extreme? You could say that. But when the Etherean Empire has the firepower to level entire planets, you don't exactly have the luxury of choosing the peaceful route. Jason shifted his weight, considering the implications. All right, so we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Either we stop your mom's plan and risk a galactic war, or we let her do whatever she wants and wait for the universe to burn. That's not all of it, Solara interjected, her eyes sharp. There's a third option, a way to prevent war, to change the direction of the galaxy without destroying it. But to do that, I need help. Not just from you, but from anyone willing to challenge the system. Jason scratched the back of his head, trying to make sense of it all. He wasn't a politician, and frankly, the galaxy's political drama wasn't high on his list of priorities. But he knew one thing. When you got involved with royalty, things tended to spiral out of control. So let me get this straight, he said, turning to the rebels. We're talking about changing the fate of the galaxy here. And you expect us to do that with no plan, no resources, and only the vaguest idea of what Solara's mom is really after? The rebel leader, Mara, eyed him warily. We have resources, and as for the plan, we've been working on it. But we need more than just resources. We need a way to get to the heart of the Etherean Empire's power. We need access to their command center. Jason narrowed his eyes. That sounds like a suicide mission. Yeah, well, the galaxy doesn't leave much room for comfortable options, Mara said with a shrug. You wanted to survive the battle, Cray? You want to survive this? Then we do this together. No one's getting out of this mess alone. Jason looked at Solara, who was watching him closely. And you, Princess? What's your part in all this, besides being the rebel rallying cry? I'm the key, she said simply. The Etherean Empire will only listen to me. If I can convince enough factions to rally behind me, I can stop the war before it starts. But first, I need to ensure the support of the people closest to the Queen. That's where you come in. Jason thought about it for a moment, then sighed. Okay, sure. Let's make this interesting. First, though, you owe me a drink. I've saved your life, after all. Kind of a protocol thing in my line of work. Solara raised an eyebrow. You are truly persistent, Jason grinned. It's what keeps me alive. The tension in the room shifted, and for the first time since they arrived at the outpost, Jason felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something bigger. The fate of the galaxy was at stake, and whether he liked it or not, he was in the thick of it now. And as the rebels began to gather their resources, Jason couldn't help but wonder. How long could he keep up this charade? How long until the weight of everything started to crush them all? The rebel outpost buzzed with activity as the plan began to take shape. Jason found himself caught in a whirlwind of strategy and hastily drawn maps, none of which seemed to make much sense to him. He was used to clear-cut orders and combat operations, not trying to outmaneuver a galaxy-spanning empire with a handful of ragtag rebels. Still, there was something oddly comforting about the chaos. It felt familiar, like the early days of a fight when everything was still up in the air. Mara, the rebel leader, leaned over a holographic table, her finger tracing lines on the map of Etherean-controlled territory. If we're going to get to the heart of their command center, we'll need to hit them from multiple angles, disrupt their defenses, draw attention away from the target, and then what? Jason interrupted, folding his arms. We walk in like we own the place? Mara shot him a pointed look. You're not going to walk in like anything. The plan involves stealth and precision, not just your usual blow everything up and hope for the best tactic. Jason grinned. Hey, that's my trademark move. It's never let me down. I'm sure, Mara said dryly, but this time, we'll need something more than just your charm and strategic humor. Jason raised an eyebrow. Charm? Who said anything about charm? Solara, who had been quiet in the corner, observing the growing tension between Jason and the rebels, stepped forward. Mara's right. We need to approach this carefully. The Etherean Empire isn't going to fall for the same tricks twice. Jason didn't miss the way her eyes lingered on him, and for a moment, the weight of everything settled back on his shoulders. The fate of the galaxy, the future of the rebellion, and his role in all of it. But for now, the only thing that mattered was the task at hand. So what's the plan? He asked, willing himself to focus. Mara tapped a few commands on the holographic table, and a schematic of the Etherian command center appeared. It was a massive structure located on a heavily fortified moon orbiting a gas giant. The layout showed layers of defenses with anti-aircraft batteries, shield generators, and multiple levels of security. "We'll start by hitting their communication tower," Mara explained. "That'll cut off their ability to coordinate and alert reinforcements. While that's happening, a small team will infiltrate through the lower levels, using the access tunnels to avoid detection. The real trick is getting Solara close to the Queen's inner circle." Solara nodded, her face unreadable. "If we can do that, I can convince the Queen to stand down." Jason glanced at her, then at the rebel leader. "Let me guess. You're the small team infiltrating the inner sanctum, and I'm the distraction?" "Not quite," Mara said, a smirk tugging at her lips. "You'll be our wild card. You're going to cause enough of a stir outside that the Etherians won't even notice us slipping in." Jason couldn't help but laugh. "So I'm basically the human smokescreen? Nice." Solara's lips curled into the slightest of smiles. "Seems to suit you." Jason rolled his eyes. "It's always the let's throw the human in first strategy. I get it. But hey, as long as there's a solid exit plan, I'm all in." "I wouldn't want to disappoint you," Mara said. "But there's one catch. Once we get in, you'll need to work fast. We can't afford any mistakes." "Great," Jason said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "No pressure, right?" Mara's expression softened. "We've been planning this for weeks, Cray, and now we're going to need you more than ever. This isn't just a fight for survival. It's a fight for the future." Jason looked at Solara again, her blue skin almost glowing under the dim light. She didn't look like a princess, not the way he'd imagined. She looked like someone who had seen the horrors of war, someone who wasn't afraid to make the hard decisions. In that moment, he understood. She wasn't just trying to save her people. She was trying to save the galaxy itself. "So where do we start?" he asked, pushing aside the lingering doubts. It didn't matter what came next. All that mattered was the job. Mara smiled, a dangerous glint in her eye. "First, we get you a ship. Something discreet." Jason raised an eyebrow. "Discreet? I'm not exactly known for being subtle." "We'll make do," Mara said, unfazed. "The less attention we attract, the better." Jason followed Mara through the outpost's back hallways, trying to push past the sense of unease gnawing at him. He wasn't a hero. He was a soldier, a grunt. Yet here he was, being asked to step into the biggest mission of his life. There was a certain absurdity to it. But then again, when had life ever been anything but absurd? Solara, following closely behind, caught his eye. "You seem uneasy." "Uneasy?" Jason laughed. "I'm just thrilled to be part of a grand galactic conspiracy. Nothing weird about that." She smirked. "I thought soldiers liked a challenge." "Oh, I do," he replied, his tone light. "But usually the challenge doesn't involve trying to save a galaxy I barely understand from a queen who thinks diplomacy is overrated." She chuckled, the sound soft but genuine. "Fair point." As they rounded a corner, a small group of rebels emerged from the shadows, one of them holding a small, sleek ship's data pad. Mara gave a quick nod, signaling that the next phase was about to begin. "All right, Cray," Mara said, handing him a small device. "Here's the plan. We move in fast, hit them hard, and get Solara close to the Queen. You make sure the Etherians don't realize what's happening until it's too late." Jason grinned. "Now that's my kind of plan." As he turned to head for the ship, his mind began to race. A wild card. That's what they wanted him to be. And in a way, that's exactly what he was. But even wild cards needed a solid hand to play. And Jason wasn't about to let this one slip through his fingers. The ship was far smaller than Jason expected, almost comically so. It was sleek, silver, and aerodynamic, nothing like the bulky warships he was used to. This one had a certain elegance, like a predator that didn't need to announce its presence. But it also had an air of fragility about it that made Jason want to laugh. He wasn't sure if it was the thin, almost glass-like exterior or the fact that Mara had proudly called it a stealth transport. He had a sneaking suspicion that stealth was just a fancy way of saying, "We're really going to hope we don't get shot down." "Don't let the size fool you," Mara said, noticing his raised eyebrows. This ship is state-of-the-art. It can slip past their radar, stay out of range, and get us where we need to be. Jason grinned. Oh, so it's a spaceship-sized ninja? You could say that, Mara said, her lips curling into a smirk. Just don't start using it to sneak into enemy lines and steal their snacks. We need this thing in one piece. I'm a professional, Jason said, his tone dry. A stealth ninja, if you will. I'm all about minimal damage, maximum chaos. Solara, standing behind them, looked at the ship with something like fondness, though it was hard to read. The princess had been quieter than usual, her thoughts distant as they prepared for the mission. Jason couldn't blame her. She was about to face her mother's empire head-on, and despite the bravado, he could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. "Ready to make history, Your Highness?" Jason asked, giving her a wink. Solara turned to him, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "History is overrated. I'm more concerned about surviving the trip." "Survival? Yeah, that's the plan," Jason said with a nod, his voice turning more serious. "But hey, we're all still here, so that's got to count for something, right?" "Right," Solara said softly, though the uncertainty in her voice didn't escape Jason's notice. They boarded the ship, and Jason immediately took a seat at the controls, familiarizing himself with the cockpit. The layout was compact, just enough room for the crew, a few supplies, and a whole lot of buttons that seemed a little too advanced for his liking. But then again, he was just here to fly, not to understand quantum propulsion and anti-gravity fields. "So, what's the plan once we're in the air?" Jason asked, his hands moving over the ship's controls with practiced ease. "Do I just fly under the radar and hope the Etherians don't notice us?" "That's about the gist of it," Mara said, her voice tinged with amusement. "Stay low, stay quiet. We don't need a high-speed chase." "Good, I prefer my escapes without the whole getting shot at part." As the ship powered up and the rebel outpost began to fade from view, Jason took a deep breath, focusing on the task ahead. The comm system hummed with static, and he double-checked their coordinates. They were heading straight into enemy territory, into the heart of the Etherian Empire. A perfect place for a showdown. The only problem? Jason wasn't exactly the type to sit quietly and wait. He was the type to jump in, guns blazing, and let things unfold from there. But this mission required subtlety, and for once, Jason was going to have to resist the urge to stir things up. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft hum of the engines and the occasional glance exchanged between the crew. The closer they got to their target, the more tense the atmosphere became. Jason could feel the weight of it, even if no one said a word. After a few moments, Solara finally spoke. "We're getting close. We should prepare ourselves for the next phase." Jason glanced over his shoulder. "Don't worry. I've been ready since the moment I strapped in. If anything, I'm just getting warmed up." Mara shot him a look, half exasperated, half amused. "Just remember the quiet part. We're not here to be heroes. We're here to get you into the Queen's inner circle without anyone knowing." Jason grinned. "Quiet? I'm practically a shadow. The Etherians won't even know what hit them." Solara's eyes narrowed slightly. "And if they do," Jason gave her a wink, "then we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. You know, like heroes do." The tension in the air lightened just for a moment. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind everyone that they had a job to do. And even if they were all a little out of their depth, they could still find comfort in the chaos. The ship broke through the atmosphere of the gas giant, and the vast expanse of space stretched out before them, cold and infinite. Ahead, the Etherian command center loomed, its massive, heavily fortified presence barely visible against the backdrop of stars. It was a sight to behold, imposing, nearly indestructible, and entirely unforgiving. Jason focused on the controls, bringing the ship in low. He could feel the ship's systems responding to his commands, each movement smooth and precise as they slid under the radar. "All systems are green," Jason reported, his voice steady. "We're in." Mara leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the glowing map in front of her. "Now we wait for the signal." Jason shot a look at Solara. "You sure you're ready for this?" She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I've been ready for a long time, but now it's about more than just me. It's about the future." He nodded, knowing that this mission wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something far bigger than any of them. And as they drifted closer to their destination, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that their actions would echo across the galaxy for years to come. And for better or worse, he was right in the middle of it. "Let's make this count," he said, his voice low. And with that, they entered the heart of the Empire, their mission hanging in the balance. So the ship glided through the shadowed corridors of the Etherian Command Center, its sleek hull barely making a sound as it drifted past walls adorned with alien symbols and guarded by systems far beyond anything Jason had encountered before. But despite the highly advanced technology, the whole place had an eerily sterile feel, like a fortress that was more about keeping people out than actually functioning. Jason leaned back in his seat, eyes fixed on the glowing console before him. "You know," he said, glancing over at Mara, "I always thought my first real mission would involve some kind of explosive device or a high-speed chase. This stealth thing kind of feels like I'm the one being snuck in." Mara, ever the focused leader, didn't flinch. "Well, if you want explosions, wait for the after-party. We have a queen to meet first." Solara, sitting silently beside them, wasn't so quick with the jokes. Her expression was serious, her mind clearly on the meeting that would determine the future of the galaxy. The stakes couldn't have been higher, yet she seemed to carry the weight of it all with a calm exterior. "I think after-party might be pushing it," Jason said, breaking the silence. "I mean, after this is all over, I'll be lucky if I can get a hot meal and a solid nap." Solara gave him a faint smile. "You'll get that, soldier, after we get through this." Jason turned his gaze to the stars outside the window, the enormity of what they were about to do weighing on him. This wasn't just about him anymore. The rebellion, Solara, the entire galaxy, it all hinged on the decisions they made now. Jason wasn't a king or a prince, just a soldier who had somehow ended up in the midst of the greatest gamble of the century. But even he could feel the shift in his purpose. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as powerless as he thought. The command center loomed larger as they drew closer to their destination. The quiet hum of the ship's engines was the only sound that filled the air, and for a moment, Jason let himself lean into the stillness. "All right," Mara finally said, breaking the silence with a quiet command. "We've reached the landing dock. Time to move." Jason stood up, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline hit him, but tempered with something new. Resolve. He wasn't just here to play the part of a pawn. No, he had a role to play now. And while the plan had been about stealth and precision, Jason had come to realize that, in this galaxy, sometimes it was the unexpected moves, the ones that no one saw coming, that made all the difference. As they disembarked, the air inside the command center felt thicker, more oppressive. Security was tight, too tight. The Etherians were clearly aware of the threat they posed, but their intelligence had underestimated one critical factor: the unpredictability of human ingenuity. Jason cracked a smile. "Okay, I admit it," he muttered under his breath. "This is definitely a blow everything up and hope for the best moment." Mara shot him a look. "Try to stay subtle." "Subtlety is overrated," he shot back with a wink. "Besides, I like my plans with a little bit of flair." The tension in the air was palpable, but Jason knew that their path forward wouldn't be paved in quiet stealth anymore. They were all in, and whatever happened next would set the course for everything. They slipped through the corridors of the command center, using the disarray they'd caused to cover their movements. As they neared the Queen's chambers, Jason's heart pounded. This wasn't just an infiltration mission anymore. This was the culmination of weeks of planning, fighting, and struggling to outmaneuver the galaxy's deadliest empire. Inside, the Queen was waiting. Solara stepped forward first, her regal presence filling the room. Her mother, the Etherian Queen, stood at the center of the chamber, her gaze cold and calculating. "Solara," the Queen's voice was as sharp as a blade. "You've brought them here. Why?" Solara didn't flinch. "Because it's time to change the future." Jason watched as the two women stood in silence, the weight of their family ties hanging between them like a heavy fog. The Queen was powerful, but Solara had something her mother could never possess: hope. And it was in that hope, in that belief in something greater than the status quo, that Jason had come to understand his role in all of this. The conversation that followed was tense, a mix of negotiations, threats, and subtle maneuvers. But in the end, it was clear that Solara had won. The Queen, for all her power, could not overcome the momentum of change. It was a quiet victory, not one of explosions or flashy heroics, but of a new path being forged. As they left the Queen's chambers, the reality of their success began to sink in. They had done it. The rebellion had a future. The galaxy had a future. And it wasn't one dictated by fear and war. Mara clapped Jason on the shoulder. "Well, you did it, Cray. I guess you're not just the wild card anymore." Jason grinned, the familiar sense of humor returning. "What can I say? I was made for the big leagues." Solara smiled softly. "You played your part. The galaxy owes you more than you realize." Jason's heart softened at her words, and for the first time since all of this had started, he felt a sense of peace. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He wasn't a king or a commander, but he had been a catalyst for change. And in this universe, where wars raged and empires fell, that was enough. As the crew boarded their ship, ready to face whatever came next, Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The galaxy wasn't perfect, but it was a little bit brighter now. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. "You ready for the after party?" Mara asked with a grin. Jason chuckled. "You know, I'm actually looking forward to the quiet part." And as the ship took off into the stars, he realized that, no matter what came next, he had already found his place in the universe. The station orbiting the gas giant was called Horizon Station, a fitting name for a place suspended at the edge of the known universe, teetering between the dark unknown and the endless abyss of deep space. With its gleaming, sterile walls and the hum of machinery, it felt more like an extension of the void than a place of discovery. The crew lived in a routine, one where the cycle of days and nights blurred into a never-ending loop of research, calculations, and the occasional attempt to make small talk with a fellow scientist. Dr. Ethan Morrow, an astrobiologist with an affinity for pondering the meaning of existence between cups of tasteless synthetic coffee, was no stranger to the isolation. He'd grown used to the endless silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the station's structure or the distant ping of the communication network. This was the life he'd chosen after all, or rather, it had chosen him. His days revolved around examining the alien biology of creatures discovered on distant planets, trying to unlock the secrets of life beyond Earth's familiar limits. But even Ethan, with all his knowledge, couldn't have predicted the one thing that would crack the monotony of his existence. It started as any other day, Ethan's shoes squeaking as he shuffled across the sterile halls, carrying a data pad and a half-eaten protein bar. His lab coat fluttered slightly with each step, as if it too was bored of the repetition. He was heading toward the biolab when the door slid open, revealing a sight that momentarily halted his brain's usual function. There, standing in the doorway, was the kind of presence that could make an entire room go still. Lyra. She wasn't like the other aliens he had encountered in his years of space research. Sure, there were the usual bipedal forms, with varying skin tones and even some with tentacles or extra limbs. But Lyra, she was different. Her human-like appearance was striking, almost too familiar, until you noticed the long, tapering ears that peeked from beneath her raven-black hair, a feature so subtly alien it seemed both out of place and perfectly natural. Her skin, a soft shade of ivory, had an ethereal glow, like moonlight catching on a marble statue. And those eyes, his mind stuttered at the thought of them, were vast, endless pools of deep blue that seemed to pull him into a galaxy of their own, shifting in color as if they were reflecting the very stars themselves. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his usual confidence faltering for the first time in years. He had studied countless species, analyzed genetic code that spanned galaxies, yet nothing prepared him for the intensity of her presence. And naturally, like any self-respecting human, his response was, "Wow, your eyes, they're amazing." A simple statement, one he had made countless times when marveling at a particularly striking feature, expecting the usual polite nod, maybe a smile, or even a modest thank you. It was a harmless comment, wasn't it? But instead of the expected social niceties, Lyra didn't blink. In fact, her face remained impassive, her eyes unwavering. Her lips parted slightly as though preparing to speak. But what came next was not what Ethan expected at all. "Strength is what my people value," she said, her voice calm and almost mechanical, as if she had said it 1,000 times before. "Appearance is secondary." Ethan's mind struggled to catch up. It wasn't a rejection. Not exactly, but the bluntness of it was like a slap to the face. He cleared his throat awkwardly, suddenly aware of the fact that he had been staring. Staring for far too long, no doubt. He shuffled his feet, attempting to regain his composure. "Well, I mean, sure, yeah, strength is important," he said, the words tumbling out in a somewhat embarrassed rush. "But you know, humans, well, we appreciate beauty too. It's just kind of natural." Lyra didn't seem particularly interested in his floundering response. Instead, she raised an eyebrow slightly, as if considering his words for the first time. Her eyes shifted, the color deepening as if something within her had just shifted. Then almost imperceptibly, she smiled, just the faintest curve of her lips. "I find it curious," she mused, her voice dropping to a soft, contemplative tone, "that your species puts so much value on something as fleeting as appearance. It's almost laughable." Ethan blinked, unsure of whether to laugh or remain mortified. He opted for the latter. I wasn't really trying to, make a statement. It was just a compliment," he mumbled, still feeling the weight of her gaze pressing down on him. Lyra's smile, once so elusive, now lingered a little longer. It wasn't a smile of mockery, but more a genuine, yet puzzling reflection, as if she found humans' ways of interacting, both amusing and perplexing. The tension, once thick in the air, began to thin, and a strange warmth settled in its place. Ethan found himself exhaling a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Human humor," she remarked, her voice lightly teasing. "You mask everything with jokes, don't you? Beneath the humor lies something far more complex." Ethan chuckled nervously, unsure if she was being complimentary or simply observing him like some kind of lab specimen. He gave her a half smile, trying to recover his composure. "Well, that's the human condition for you," he replied with a shrug. "We try to make light of things, especially when we're caught off guard. It's like a defense mechanism. Keeps us from, totally freaking out." Lyra's gaze softened, the corners of her mouth tilting upward in amusement. "Interesting," she said quietly. "Perhaps that is strength in its own right. Finding humor even in moments of vulnerability." It was one of those rare moments where the conversation seemed to stretch and bend around them, an unspoken understanding passing between them. There was something profound in the simplicity of their exchange, yet something so human about it too. Ethan found himself both baffled and intrigued by the alien woman before him. Her directness was disarming, and yet her ability to recognize his own vulnerability, however slight, was unnervingly perceptive. "Maybe you're right," he said, scratching the back of his head. "But still, no one ever told me that a compliment about eyes could turn into an existential crisis." Lyra raised her eyebrow again, a knowing glint in her eyes. "Perhaps you should reconsider what makes you uncomfortable, Doctor. Morrow, you never know what might hide beneath it." And with that, she turned and walked away, her long, fluid strides taking her down the hallway. Ethan stood frozen in place for a moment, unsure of what had just happened, or more accurately, unsure of how he was supposed to feel about it. He watched her leave, a strange mixture of awe and confusion lingering in his chest. One thing was certain, he wasn't about to forget the first conversation he had with the alien woman named Lyra, nor the way it made him question everything he thought he knew about connections, strength, and perhaps even what it meant to be truly vulnerable. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a spark of something other than scientific curiosity. It wasn't attraction, not exactly, not in the way he had expected. It was something far more intriguing, something that didn't fit neatly into any category he was used to, something more human. And for a moment, just a fleeting moment, he wondered if perhaps the universe had just handed him something far more profound than he was ready for. The next day, Ethan found himself inexplicably thinking about Lyra, which wasn't all that unusual. It was hard not to think about someone when they had made you feel like your very thoughts had been picked apart, analyzed, and then casually tossed aside. The morning had started with a grim realization that Horizon Station's coffee supply was running low again, and it had only taken him 10 minutes of walking around to remember that the replicators had started to malfunction, meaning he was stuck with whatever stale, pre-packaged caffeine substitute they had left. He had the distinct feeling that his day was not off to the best start, which was only further confirmed when his first call of the day was an accidental butt dial from his assistant, Zoe, who had apparently been in the middle of discussing some kind of botanical experiment with someone on the other side of the galaxy. But that was the life of a scientist on Horizon. Endless disconnections and malfunctions, with a sprinkle of occasional cosmic significance if you were lucky. But none of that mattered now. The real issue was the unexpected shift that had happened inside him since his brief encounter with Lyra. Ethan had always considered himself a man of logic, someone who thrived on structure and predictability. His world was defined by the study of alien organisms, meticulously categorizing them, analyzing their genetic structures, understanding their ecosystems. To him, everything had a system, a reason. But Lyra, she had introduced a certain unpredictability into the equation, and that was what unnerved him. The truth was, Ethan had no idea how to approach her the next time they crossed paths. Should he act like everything was normal? Pretend the last conversation had been a standard exchange? Or was there some deeper meaning to her words that he had yet to uncover? His thoughts spiraled as he walked through the narrow corridors of the station, heading to the biolab. He couldn't seem to escape the odd tug of curiosity, not when his brain kept replaying her words. Strength is what my people value. The bluntness of it had stung, but there had been something else behind it, a quiet sort of wisdom, an insight into a culture that seemed entirely foreign, yet somehow familiar. That's when he saw her again. Lyra was standing by one of the observation windows, gazing out at the gas giant below them. The swirling blue and purple clouds of the planet were mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. He had seen them 100 times, but for some reason, watching her watch them felt like an entirely new experience. She didn't turn to acknowledge him as he approached, but the air seemed to hum with something unspoken. He wondered briefly if she had some sort of radar-like ability to sense his presence even before he reached her. Still fascinated by it, huh? Ethan said with a grin, trying to break the awkwardness that seemed to hang between them. It's pretty, I'll admit, but after a while it starts to feel like looking at the same painting over and over. She didn't respond right away, her eyes never leaving the view. But when she did speak, her voice was soft, thoughtful. Do you ever wonder, she began, her words measured, as though she were considering each one carefully, what it would be like to be as indifferent as the planet, to simply exist without the need for anything else? Ethan blinked, momentarily caught off guard. The question felt weightier than it seemed on the surface. He had expected small talk, maybe a snide comment about his earlier compliment, but this was something else entirely, something more vulnerable, if that was even possible. I guess, maybe, he said slowly, but I'm not sure I'd want to be that indifferent. Isn't part of being human about wanting more than just existence? Ambition, love, curiosity, all that stuff? She turned her head just enough for their eyes to meet, and in that brief moment, Ethan felt as though she was stripping away every layer of pretense he had built up. Her gaze was still as intense as it had been the first time they locked eyes, but there was something softer there now, something deeper. He couldn't place it, but it made him feel exposed, as if she could see through every mask he'd ever worn. I think, Lyra said, her voice almost too quiet, that your species doesn't understand the true meaning of strength. Ethan felt his stomach tighten, half expecting the conversation to take a familiar turn, to dive back into the realm of alien superiority or some impassive observation about human behavior. But instead, she surprised him again. It's not about power or dominance, she continued. It's about resilience, about being able to carry your burdens without breaking. The world, your world, is built on the idea of conquest, of overcoming weakness. But real strength, true strength, is the ability to endure without that constant need to prove yourself. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He wasn't sure whether to agree, argue, or simply shut up and listen. It was as if she had just peeled back some layer of human behavior that he had never considered. Something that had been hiding right beneath the surface. The kind of strength she was talking about wasn't about force. It wasn't about the loud, boisterous battles he had always associated with power. It was quieter, more internal, and maybe, just maybe, he realized, more human. Resilience, he repeated, testing the word on his tongue. It felt strange coming from him. That's, a little different than what I was taught growing up. Lyra glanced at him then, and for the first time, her lips curled into something that wasn't a smile, but wasn't entirely a frown either. It was like a gesture of understanding, of some unspoken acknowledgement that they were both still figuring this out. It's not what you were taught that matters, she said softly. It's what you choose to believe. Ethan chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. You really have a way with words, don't you? I mean, I was hoping for a thank you for the eye's comment, but here I am, questioning my entire worldview. Lyra raised an eyebrow. Perhaps you should be thankful for that. After all, growth only comes when you question the things you take for granted. Great, Ethan said, shaking his head with mock dismay. Now I'm going to spend the rest of the day thinking about how my whole life has been a series of assumptions waiting to be shattered. I was just trying to have a nice quiet cup of coffee this morning. She didn't laugh. Lyra's sense of humor seemed to operate on a different wavelength, more subtle and dry than most humans could manage, but there was something in her eyes that made Ethan feel like he had said exactly what needed to be said. For all the intellectual barriers between them, there was a strange camaraderie forming. Maybe it wasn't friendship exactly, but it was something else, something different, something unspoken yet powerful. You think too much, Lyra said, her voice softening, almost teasing. You'll drive yourself mad if you keep overanalyzing everything. Guess that's my job, Ethan replied with a shrug. I'm a scientist. Overthinking is sort of in the job description. Perhaps, she said, but sometimes it's better to simply exist and let the universe show you what it wants. Ethan smiled, feeling the faintest flicker of something unfamiliar, something he wasn't entirely ready to name. Maybe it was the beginning of a friendship. Maybe it was the start of something deeper. He didn't know yet, but he wasn't in a hurry to figure it out. For once, he allowed himself to simply be in the moment. Well, he said, chuckling lightly, maybe you're right. I'll try to take a break from trying to solve the mysteries of the universe for a while, at least until the next existential crisis hits. Lyra looked at him for a long moment before nodding, as if she understood him in a way that was both reassuring and unnerving at the same time. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel the need to ask any more questions. The answers, it seemed, would come when they were ready. As they stood there in silence, gazing out at the swirling gas clouds, it was clear that whatever was happening between them wasn't something either of them could predict. But perhaps that was part of the allure. Sometimes the most interesting things in the universe weren't the ones you could explain, but the ones that refused to be understood, no matter how hard you tried. And right now, Ethan was beginning to realize Lyra was one of those things. The days that followed were a strange blur for Ethan. He went through the motions of his work, analyzing new samples from the recent expedition to a nearby moon, conducting routine scans of the surrounding stars, and even cataloging yet another new species of plant that smelled faintly of ammonia. But none of it felt quite as important as it once had. Somewhere between his scientific observations and the quiet hum of the station, he had found something else, something he hadn't known he was searching for. It wasn't until the unexpected communication from Earth arrived that Ethan truly realized how far he had come since his first flustered interaction with Lyra. The message came as a standard update from the Horizon Station's administration, filled with bureaucratic nonsense and directives about upcoming space exploration missions. But buried at the end was a brief line from his old colleague back on Earth, asking if he was ready to return home. At first, Ethan felt a pang of anxiety. The question was simple, but it carried weight. Home, Earth, the place he had left behind, the familiar comforts of routine and predictability. But for some reason, The idea of going back didn't sit well with him. He had come to space to escape, to explore, to discover new frontiers. And yet, he realized now, the greatest discovery had been right in front of him all along. Lyra. She had become more than a curious alien specimen. She was something else. Someone who, in her own way, had made him rethink everything he had known about strength, vulnerability, and connection. Their conversations had started with awkwardness and jokes, light-hearted moments that seemed to cover up something deeper. But as time passed, those exchanges grew more meaningful, more personal. They no longer felt like the usual scientific banter between colleagues, but something more, something unspoken but undeniably real. The last time they spoke, they had been standing side by side in the observation deck, staring out at the vast expanse of space. Ethan had asked her, somewhat hesitantly, what her world was like. The question had seemed trivial at the time, yet it had opened a door neither of them had expected to walk through. "It's not much different from here," Lyra had said, her voice carrying the weight of experiences he would never fully understand. "We live, we fight, we endure. But there's always something more, something beyond. The question is, do you keep searching for it?" Ethan hadn't had an answer for her then. But as the days passed, as the hum of the station became more familiar, he began to realize that the question wasn't just hers. It was his, too. And that's when he knew. He couldn't leave. Not yet. Not when there was something he hadn't fully explored. Something that was now as much a part of him as the universe outside the station. He wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the way she had challenged him to rethink everything he took for granted, or the way she had made him laugh, even in the midst of his deepest uncertainties. Or maybe it was the quiet understanding they had begun to share, as if both of them had been waiting for someone who could look beyond the surface and see the complexities underneath. Either way, Ethan knew that leaving would be like stepping back into a life that no longer fit him. His old world, his life on Earth, felt distant, like a dream he couldn't quite grasp. He had changed in ways he couldn't even fully explain, and the thought of returning to the same old routine seemed impossible. He had learned from Lyra that strength wasn't about what you could conquer, but about what you could endure. And that was a lesson that wasn't just about physical resilience. It was about emotional endurance, too. It was about being able to face the unknown, to live in the uncertainty, and to still have the courage to reach for something more. And so, he made a decision. A quiet one, but a firm one. He wasn't going back to Earth. Not yet, and maybe not ever. His place, his journey was here, in the vast emptiness of space, alongside a woman who had taught him more about life than he ever could have imagined. He sought out Lyra the next morning, a little nervous but determined. She was in the same spot, staring out at the planet below. It had become something of a ritual, one that both of them had silently agreed upon. She turned when he entered, her expression unreadable as always. "I got a message from Earth," he said, his voice a little unsteady. "They want me to come home." Lyra didn't say anything for a moment, but her eyes flickered, just slightly, as if she were processing his words. She wasn't surprised. She never was. But the silence between them was heavy, pregnant with something neither of them was willing to speak just yet. "What did you tell them?" she asked finally. Ethan paused. The question wasn't as simple as it seemed. He could have given her the usual answer, the one that came so easily to him. Just go back, pick up where he left off. But in that moment, he realized how far he had come. He wasn't the same person who had arrived at Horizon Station all those months ago. He wasn't just a scientist anymore. He wasn't just a man trying to escape from something. He had found something, something he hadn't even known he was searching for. "I told them I wasn't ready," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. I think there's still more to discover here. Not just out there," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the infinite space outside the window. "But here, in me, and in you." Lyra studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. But Ethan saw something there, a flicker of something, perhaps understanding, perhaps approval. He wasn't sure, but it didn't matter. In that moment, he realized that what they shared didn't need to be explained or defined. It just was. "So you'll stay?" she asked, her voice gentle. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I'll stay." The tension between them, once so thick, seemed to dissolve, leaving only a quiet understanding. No words were necessary. They both knew what lay ahead. The future was uncertain. Space, after all, had a way of being unpredictable. But for the first time, Ethan felt ready to face whatever it held. He wasn't running from something anymore. He was walking towards something. And for the first time, he didn't feel alone. Lyra gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then, as if to lighten the moment, she added, "You know, you might want to reconsider your obsession with the replicator coffee. We have better options." Ethan chuckled, the sound echoing softly in the vast observation room. For the first time in a long while, it was a laugh without any bitterness, without any hesitation. It was just a laugh. And as they both turned to look out at the swirling gas giant, Ethan realized that it wasn't the stars or the planets that made the universe so vast. It was the connections, the small, quiet moments between people that, against all odds, made everything feel just a little bit more like home. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but whatever it was, he knew that he wasn't facing it alone. And for the first time in his life, that was enough. Ilara's flagship, the Fury of Zixra, cut through the deep black of space, its sleek hull glinting under the distant stars like a shard of obsidian in the night. The ship was her kingdom, a magnificent palace of technology and might, filled with the whispers of loyal servants and the ever-present hum of its engines. A sound that had once brought her peace, but now only reminded her of the cold emptiness she felt. The universe bowed before her power, and yet Ilara found herself standing before a window, staring out at the endless expanse, pondering a question that had no answer. Why was it that a human man had begun to occupy so much of her thoughts? "Your Majesty, the human ambassador has arrived," a voice crackled through her comm system, a reminder that she could no longer remain lost in the endless void of her own mind. Ilara sighed and straightened her posture. Her long, pointed ears flicked, betraying her discomfort. "Let him in," she commanded, her voice as cold as the vacuum outside. The door slid open to reveal the figure of Dorian Reed, the biologist who had been sent to represent Earth at the Zixran summit. He was tall, taller than most humans, and had that disarming quality that made him seem almost out of place in the high-stakes world of galactic diplomacy. His dark hair was a bit unruly, and his hands were perpetually stained with strange, unidentifiable substances from the various experiments he conducted. Despite the power she wielded, Ilara couldn't help but find his disheveled appearance oddly endearing. "Ah, the Queen of the Stars, as terrifying and magnificent as ever," Dorian said with a crooked grin as he strolled into the room. "I see your taste in architecture hasn't changed since our last meeting. Still trying to intimidate everyone with your furniture, huh?" Ilara blinked, momentarily thrown off guard. "What do you mean by that?" "The chairs," he pointed with a casual wave. "I mean, no one wants to sit in those things. It's like sitting on a throne that has no concept of comfort. It's like a tactical move designed to make your guests feel utterly insignificant. But hey, they look cool. I'll give you that." For a fleeting moment, Alara's lips twitched. She was the queen of a vast empire that spanned across the galaxy, feared and revered by entire species. And yet here was a human, standing before her, making jokes about her throne room furniture. It was absurd and, she would admit to herself reluctantly, refreshing. "I didn't design the chairs," she said with a hint of amusement that even she didn't expect. "But I assure you, they are very comfortable if you know how to sit in them." Dorian raised an eyebrow. "Is there a class I need to take? Or should I just sit here and pretend I'm the head of some intergalactic warlord empire?" "The second option is preferable," Ilara replied, her tone turning back to its usual sharpness. "Now, if you're quite finished with your analysis of my furniture, perhaps you could explain why you've been avoiding the summit discussions." Dorian leaned against a console, his grin widening. "Ah, I see you've noticed. Well, to be fair, I was a little busy with something else. You know, saving the galaxy's flora from complete and utter destruction. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it." He gestured vaguely, as though tending to alien plants was the most casual of tasks. I'm sure the politics can wait a few hours. Alara's brow furrowed, though she couldn't help but be intrigued by his nonchalant attitude. The summit is important, Dorian. The Zixra Empire does not take kindly to delays. Dorian raised his hands in mock surrender. Hey, no one said I was trying to delay it on purpose. Besides, you can't have a summit without a little chaos, right? I mean, who would listen to a meeting that went perfectly according to plan? Ilara's lips curled into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. It was a rare sight. She was a creature born of command, bred to conquer, to rule. Her life had been one of absolute control, the kind of life where every moment was meticulously calculated. But Dorian, he lived on chaos, on humor, on an irreverence she found both unsettling and strangely liberating. So what exactly have you been doing to save the galaxy's plants then? She asked, her voice light, though she was genuinely curious. Oh, you know, he said, feigning a casual tone as he pulled a small device from his pocket. Just stopping a few agricultural systems from going rogue. Apparently, someone thought it would be a good idea to engineer a new breed of hyper-efficient algae that grows so fast it consumes entire ecosystems. I was fixing that. Nothing too dramatic, but I'm sure it won't matter to you. I imagine you're much more interested in the fate of your fleet and your empire. Ilara crossed her arms, her long ears twitching in thought. You know, Dorian, for a man who represents a species so terrified of us, you certainly have an interesting way of talking. Terrified? Nah, I think terrified is a strong word, Dorian said, waving his hand dismissively. More like impressed and slightly worried. It's all about the delivery. She arched an eyebrow, intrigued by the way his mind worked. And how exactly would you suggest I deliver my message to your people? Well, it depends, Dorian said with a playful grin. If you want to keep terrifying them, you might want to tone down the "I'll destroy your planet with a thought" routine. Maybe add a little more flair, a dramatic pause here and there, a little humor. You'd be amazed at how far a good punchline can go. Ilara stared at him for a moment, processing his words. Humor. The concept was so foreign to her, and yet here he was, so effortlessly weaving it into a conversation that, by all rights, should have been fraught with tension. Was it truly so simple? Could something as trivial as humor disarm the weight of her empire's power? She couldn't help herself. I'll consider it, she said dryly, her eyes glinting with a strange, rare amusement. But only if you promise to never make jokes about my furniture again. Dorian chuckled. Deal? I mean, it's not like I was trying to get a rise out of you. It's just, you know something about giant thrones that makes me think I should have a sarcastic comment at the ready. Good, Ilara said, her tone settling back into its usual icy calm. Now, if you're quite finished with your unprovoked analysis of my throne room, perhaps we can finally discuss the future of our cooperation. Ah, yes, Dorian said, giving a mock salute. Let's get down to the important stuff. I promise to behave for the rest of the meeting. No more throne jokes, just, you know, saving the galaxy and all that. The corridors of the Fury of Zixra hummed with the usual bustle of activity, shuttles coming and going, officers reporting, and the constant thrum of starship engines keeping the ship alive in the cold silence of space. Yet for all the motion, Ilara remained as still as ever, standing in front of the viewing port of her private chamber, eyes tracing the distant stars. A perfect moment of solitude where she could gather her thoughts. Or rather, try to. Lately, her mind had been full of something she never expected. Dorian. She wasn't used to this wandering, this distraction. Power, conquest, and dominance had always consumed her, leaving little room for frivolous thoughts. But there was something about him, something that made her question everything she'd known. His humor, his ease, the way he saw the universe not as a battlefield but as something to be understood, something to be laughed at. It irritated her at first that a mere human could cause such a disruption. But now there was a different feeling, something she couldn't quite identify, something akin to curiosity. A soft chime from the door interrupted her thoughts. Your Majesty, came the voice of one of her advisors, an overzealous man named Karu, who was too eager for her approval. The summit is scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. Shall I send for the ambassador? Let him in, Ilara replied, her voice sharp, though it didn't mask the lingering distraction in her mind. The door slid open, revealing Dorian once again, looking as though he had just come from one of his many impromptu experiments in the ship's lab. His sleeves were rolled up, and his hands, though still remarkably clean, carried a faint trace of some substance that smelled faintly of sulfur and strawberries. You've been experimenting with fruits again, Ilara said dryly, raising an eyebrow. Oh, this? No, just a slight modification. You'd be surprised what happens when you combine human strawberries with a dash of Zixrin biochemistry, Dorian said, holding up a small vial filled with a glowing liquid. The results? Delicious, but deadly if you don't know what you're doing. Ilara's lips twitched. Are you telling me you nearly poisoned yourself for the sake of a fruit? Hey, in my defense, Dorian said with a grin, it's not every day you get to make a fruit that doubles as a weapon. If you're going to conquer the universe, might as well do it with something edible. She couldn't help but chuckle at his audacity. I suppose that's one way to approach galactic diplomacy. I wonder how your people would feel about you threatening them with strawberries. I'll just tell them it's an offering of peace, Dorian said. Everyone loves fruit. It's the universal truth. He walked to a nearby table and began setting down his equipment, as though the impending summit didn't concern him in the slightest. Ilara found herself watching him, both amused and unsettled. Here he was, a human, fragile, imperfect. Yet there was something about his irreverence that disarmed her. It was as though he wasn't afraid of her power, her legacy, and that, more than anything, unsettled her. She sighed and turned her attention back to the summit. Are you ready for this? She asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Oh, absolutely, Dorian said, flashing her a smile. You can count on me to be completely unprepared for everything. It's what I do best. He gave her a playful wink. You're not taking this seriously, are you? Ilara asked, her tone a bit sharper than she intended. She was the queen of a galactic empire, feared and respected across thousands of light years. And yet here was this human, acting as though a summit where the fates of entire planets hung in the balance was a mere game. Not seriously? No, I take my role very seriously, Dorian replied, feigning offense. But let's be real, Ilara. Politics are complicated. Everyone has their own agenda, and we're just trying to figure out who's going to make the biggest mess. He picked up a small device from the table and began fiddling with it. I mean, come on, a summit where we all sit around and pretend we're not going to backstab each other the second the doors close? It's all just a big game of who can smile the longest. Ilara didn't know whether to laugh or to scold him. Instead, she crossed her arms, her long, pointed ears twitching in thought. And what exactly do you think your role in all of this will be? Well, I've got a great poker face, Dorian said with a grin. I'll just stand there, look serious, nod occasionally, and say something cryptic when things get awkward. That sounds like something a human would do, Ilara replied, unable to suppress a smirk. Guilty as charged, Dorian said with a mock bow. But hey, when in doubt, go with the basics. I'm starting to think you're not taking this seriously enough, Ilara said, her tone shifting again, this time more contemplative. The human before her had a way of making light of things that should have been serious, and part of her admired it. But it also irked her. She had spent centuries building her empire, mastering the art of diplomacy and power, and here he was, making jokes at the most important summit of her reign. Yet as she watched him, she realized something. Despite his casualness, despite the levity with which he approached everything, he wasn't foolish. He understood the stakes. He was simply different. And that difference was what intrigued her. Humans had a strange way of deflecting tension, of making light of their circumstances. It was a trait Ilara had never understood until now. Perhaps it was their way of surviving in a galaxy that had never been kind to them. Or perhaps it was something more. Perhaps it was a way of staying human. Dorian, she said, her voice softening, why do you do it? Why do you persist in making jokes when the stakes are so high? He paused, his fingers hovering over the small device in his hands. Because, he said finally, if you take everything too seriously, you'll miss the point. Life's too short to be afraid of everything, to worry about what might happen next. There's always something else coming, something bigger, something scarier. Might as well find the humor in it while you can. Besides, have you seen the people we're about to sit down with? If we don't laugh, we'll be dead before the summit even starts. Ilara blinked, taken aback by his bluntness. She had never thought about it that way. She had always seen the galaxy as a battlefield, every decision a matter of life and death. But Dorian, he saw it as a game where the stakes were high, yes, but a game nonetheless. For the first time in a long time, Ilara felt a shift inside her. It wasn't a grand, earth-shattering realization, but a quiet understanding. She had spent her entire life controlling the galaxy, imposing her will on the stars. But perhaps there was another way to see it. Perhaps there was room for something beyond control, beyond power. Perhaps there was room for humor. Fine, she said with a smile, her tone softening. I'll let you handle the jokes. But if the summit turns into a disaster, I'm blaming you. Dorian raised his hands in mock surrender. Deal. I'll take full responsibility. He gave her a wink. But hey, you'll be the one to thank me when we get out of here in one piece. Ilara couldn't help but laugh. Maybe, just maybe, this human was onto something. The summit had taken its toll on everyone. Political factions that had once seemed like insurmountable obstacles were now nothing more than passing clouds in the ever-darkening sky of galactic diplomacy. But Ilara was not the same as she had been when she'd stepped onto the fury of Zixra so many days ago. Her mind, once sharp and unyielding, had begun to crack open under the weight of something she never expected to find. A human. And the funny thing was, she couldn't decide if that was a curse or a blessing. Now in the aftermath of the summit, Ilara stood on the observation deck once more, the stars spreading out before her like a vast, indifferent canvas. She was no longer simply the queen of Zixra. The universe had stretched out before her, a tapestry woven with not just conquest, but something deeper, something fragile. She had thought that power was everything, that control was all that mattered. But after the summit, after everything had unfolded with Dorian by her side, she had learned that control could be as much a cage as a throne. Dorian was sitting across from her, his fingers tapping out some sort of rhythm on the table in front of him. He didn't seem the least bit concerned, as usual, though the summit had nearly torn apart the fragile alliance between the species represented. And yet it had been Dorian, with his seemingly endless humor and that odd sense of nonchalance, who had brought everything back from the brink. She had expected him to crack under pressure, to fail her in some way, but he had done the opposite. He had reminded everyone that the universe didn't have to be so serious. It didn't have to be this dark, endless war of wills. It could perhaps be something more. You know, Dorian said, looking up from his idle tapping, I think I'm getting used to this whole saving the galaxy thing. I'm practically a pro at it now. Soon I'll have to add galactic savior to my resume. Ilara raised an eyebrow, her lips curling upward despite herself. It must be exhausting, being so heroic. Oh, absolutely, Dorian said with a smirk. The hours are terrible, the pay is non-existent, and the amount of paperwork is just... He trailed off with a dramatic sigh. But hey, someone's got to do it. Ilara couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, unguarded sound that seemed almost foreign to her at this point. She realized she hadn't laughed like that in years, perhaps centuries. The weight that had once settled so heavily on her shoulders seemed lighter now, even if only just a little. There was something liberating about Dorian's perspective. He wasn't afraid to laugh, even in the face of danger, even in the face of the universe's darkest truths. He made her want to see the world differently. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like the entire galaxy was a chessboard and she was its only player. So, Dorian said, eyes narrowing playfully as he leaned forward, now that the universe has been saved, what's next on the agenda? I'm thinking a nice vacation planet, maybe a beach with no intergalactic politicians. You know, just to kick back and relax. Ilara couldn't stop the chuckle that escaped her lips. A vacation? She repeated, shaking her head. I think you might be the only person in this galaxy who could suggest such a thing in the middle of a peace summit. Well, I didn't see you turning it down, Dorian said, grinning. It's either that or back to the old throne room, right? And we both know how much fun that is. His words hit her harder than she anticipated. A year ago, she would have dismissed the very idea of a vacation as a weakness. She would have focused on expanding her empire, quashing any signs of rebellion, ensuring that her rule was absolute. But now she found herself imagining a planet, far from the endless swirl of politics and power, where there were no expectations, no constant pressure to maintain control. I suppose, Ilara hesitated, surprised at herself for even considering it. It wouldn't be the worst idea. Dorian's smile widened. See? I knew I'd get you to consider it eventually. You just need a little bit of humor. The truth of it was, Ilara didn't know where her path would lead now. The galaxy was still vast and unforgiving. There were still those who would challenge her, still wars to be fought and alliances to be brokered. But the weight of it all had changed. She didn't have to do it alone anymore. She didn't have to be the cold, unyielding queen that everyone feared. She could be something else, someone else. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the hum of the fury of Zixra around them, the stars outside the only witness to the unspoken shift in Ilara's heart. You know, Dorian, she said finally, her voice quieter than it had ever been before, I've spent my whole life focused on power, on control, on being the one everyone turns to when things go wrong. But what if that's not enough? What if there's more than just winning? Dorian raised an eyebrow, his eyes softening with a rare sincerity. What are you saying, Ilara? I'm saying, she continued, that I think I want something more, something different, and I don't want to do it alone. Dorian nodded slowly as though considering her words carefully. Then, with a smirk that seemed somehow more genuine than before, he leaned back in his chair. I think I could get used to that. The door to her private chamber slid open just then, and a young officer stepped inside, his face pale with anxiety. Your Majesty, he said quickly, there's a situation. Ilara held up a hand, silencing him with a gesture. Later, she said, her voice calm and steady. She turned back to Dorian, who was now watching her with a glint of understanding in his eyes. The officer hesitated, clearly unsure whether to speak, but Ilara dismissed him with a simple flick of her wrist. I'm off duty for the day, she said, her tone final. The officer, stunned, bowed and left without another word. See? Dorian said with a wink. You are getting the hang of this. Ilara couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just a smile of amusement, but of realization. Perhaps the universe wasn't just about power. Perhaps it was about balance, about finding the humor in the chaos, and about knowing when to step away and take a breath. I think we might just be okay, she said softly, looking out at the stars. And for the first time, she felt that it was true. They might just be okay.